Welcome to the Real United Kingdom channel. I'm coming back at you with another video or podcast. Now I do know a podcast is usually more of an audio with a picture, but I'll call it a podcast. Okay, so today we're going to talk. Alright, I'm going to talk to you about education in the United Kingdom. The reason why I'm going to talk to you about education in the United Kingdom is because all our children will have to go to school in this country. Children in this country are expected to go to school until the age of 16, and after that they don't have to stay in school. It's just compulsory. All children have to go to school. Okay, so having said that, if you are new to this country, or you've been living in this country for a long time, or you haven't traveled up and down the country, or you don't have any professional experience of education in the country, this video is for you. It's an insider's view of the education system. It's going to be an overview, and I hope to do a series on absolute specifics, but this is an overview. It's not meant to frighten you, but as they say, to be forewarned is to be armed, to be forearmed. Okay, so let's make a start. Now, the first thing you need to know about the education system in this country is that effectively there's a three-tier system. Now, unlike a lot of countries in the world, let's say in the Commonwealth, let's say, people always talk about Singapore and how they're doing very, very well, or Japan, or Malaysia, or they'll talk about France, or they'll talk about Germany, etc., etc. Now, the big difference is that education in the United Kingdom is a three-tier system. You're not going to see this written anywhere, but it is a three-tier system. And I'll tell you what the three tiers are. One, education is either, and let me just clarify, when I'm talking about education in this video context, I'm talking about effectively going to school, from nursery to primary school, secondary school, and maybe further education. So that's what I'm talking about. Okay, so back to my point that it's a three-tier system. Okay, now the three tiers are made up of one, the private sector, and I am deliberately listed the private sector as number one. It's at the top of the tree, and I'll talk a little bit more about the different segments. The next tier is the state sector, so the schools that you don't have to pay anything up front, that's the state sector. In this country we don't talk about the public school system. The public school system or public schools means something entirely different. In this country, the public schools means the top end of the private sector. Yes, I know, it's very confusing. So, we'll talk about the state sector education. Right, the state sector, and this is where this is my opinion, but I've been in the system for 30 years and I believe I know what I'm talking about. In the state sector, you have the schools that are in the good areas. The areas where the houses are expensive, leafy suburbs, and where rich people live. So you'll find those schools there. And then you have the other schools that are in inner city areas, centre of London, centre of Manchester, Birmingham. They're right in the centre. They're among the estates. They're in the poor areas. And let me just be very, very clear. It does not necessarily mean that because a school is in a poor area, that means it's a bad school. There was a time when it was, especially London. If your school was in central London or in London, chances would have been a hopeless case. But over the years, through a lot of other initiatives by certain governments, London, on the whole, the state sector is much better than many parts of the country. And there are many, many reasons for that. And there's not enough time to explore those. It's quite detailed. What you need to know is that when you got your little Johnny or your little Sally, and you're handing them over to the school system, you've got to be very clear in your mind what you're handing them into. Because if you're going to go to the private route, it's going to cost you a lot of money. If you're going to go to the state sector, you need to know, is this the good state sector? Is this the poor school state sector? So now I'm going to describe very, very briefly each one. Now with the private sector, the private schools, they are very expensive. I would say in today's money, you used to have a lot of middle class people, doctors, lawyers, teachers, middle class people used to send their children to private sector, private schools, and many still do. But with fees costing at least, selling the secondary phase, at least £15,000 a year. Well, you and I know that is probably, that's probably not an option. I'm going to be very open about this. I worked in the state sector, and through my own decision, and I've never apologized for it, I made use of the private sector. And through a great deal of assistance and help, I made it through, just about. But looking back, I would say it was a tremendous decision. But not everybody has that option. So with the private sector, you're going to get smaller class sizes, and I'm going to be controversial. You are going to have a lot of good kids in those small classes. You are going to get a lot of parents who are paying a lot of money to send their children to those schools, and they expect their children to work, and the teachers and the head teacher, they will treat you as a valued customer. You're going to get the respect, and by and large you're going to get the results. And those children, by and large, come out very well. In this country, they say 7% of children in this country go to the private sector. And yet, the professions are dominated by people who've been to the private sector. It speaks for itself. I used it, just about. Had I had to go over it again, would I be able to do it again? I don't know. But I'm glad I did. Now within the private sector, you have got what they call the public schools. Eton, Harrow, famous worldwide. The royal family send the children there. The boys anyway, they go there. They're public school for girls. But Eton and Harrow, boys, prime ministers, let's put it this way. A lot of children who go to these schools like Eton, Harrow, their aspirations are, oh, you know what, I fancy becoming the prime minister. Because on the walls around, there are several prime ministers, kings, that's been there. That's what they aspire to. They come out with confidence. I don't want to get too bogged down with the private sector, but I'm just warning you that once you're looking at the different tiers in the system, the private sector is a sector that is there, and it has a huge influence on the rest. You know, they get the best. They teach largely what they want. They pass the exams, and all the fidgeting that governments do whenever they come into office, they don't touch the private sector. They're left alone. There's plenty of space in those schools for the children to do what they've got to do, small class sizes, not a lot of discipline problems, happy teachers, they get much better paid. So that's the private sector. Now let's go to the state sector. Now the next tier down is the good schools in the good areas. Now, this is where politicians and hypocrites, not all politicians, but there's a game that some politicians try to play, because it's seen as politically correct to send your children to the state sector. Oh, I've sent my children to the state sector. Look, I'm going to be very clear. There are politicians who say right from day one, I'm a politician, but I'm a parent. I'm going to send my child to a private school, end of matter, no discussion, that's it. I'm going to beef with those politicians. Most people don't. I'm not going to name names. You had politicians simply said, that's it. People don't have a problem with that. Where they've had a problem is where you get people, they will say one thing about sending the children to a private sector, a public school. They're not going to do it. And then later on they decide, oh no, I'm going to send them to a private school. Now that's where they get a lot of problems. And there have been at least two have got into trouble over this. Personally, as a parent, make your decision. Send your child to the school you can afford and they think is best, and that's it. You nail your colours to the mast. It doesn't matter whether you're sort of socialist or whether you're or capitalist or whatever. Just nail your colours to the mast and just get on with it. People don't have a problem with that. What they have a problem with is when you start being anti-public school and then you end up using it. That's when they have a problem. So let's get back to the top. The schools in the good areas. So they're at tier 2. Now this is very important because, and I'll tell you for why. This is important because those schools in those good areas are usually, quite a few of them, and I've worked in some of them, they can be as good as some of the private schools, because they've got the staff, they've got the type of middle class children, they've got the resources, and they work. And so in some ways, if you can get your child into a good school in a good area, then the chances are your child's gonna do very, very well. It's not going to be quite the same as a private school, but they'll get the benefits, certainly the teaching, a lot of the type of children. However, this is the catch, because in order to send your child to these schools, you've got to live in the catchment area. Now this is the catch, and the catchment area effectively is it's the radius around which a school will say, right, all the children who live within 2 miles of the school are entitled to come to the school. And that is the catch. And what makes it difficult is that people who live in expensive houses in the good areas, interesting enough, a lot of schools are usually quite good. And therefore, if you haven't got the money to buy an expensive house in a good area, you are not going to be able to send your child to a good school, tier 2 school. Now, what a lot of politicians, I'm not having a go at politicians, but you know, we got to know about this game. You know, it's a big game, the whole school thing. It's a big game, and you got to know how to play the game. And what they do is they make sure they are in the good areas so they can send their children to the good schools. Now, a particular prime minister who didn't necessarily live in the area, but this particular school, they were able to send their child to a good school in a good area. I suppose being prime minister, they opened doors for that, and so they had all the benefits of a good education without the anxiety of being in the so-called poor area. So that's a game. Now, unfortunately, many people have tried to play the game, and this is what they've tried to do. What they've tried to do is rent a place in a good area. You can do that. You got your house, you got the money, you rent a flat and you stay there. Well, at least you take some sort of occupation there. And when it comes time to enroll for a good secondary school, you claim this is where you live and you go all your documentation, etc., etc. You get in. People do that. Okay. However, what some people have tried to do is pretend to live in the area. So they've given a false address, a relative, or even claim to live in some area. And there has been a case where a certain council, I'm not going to name the council, where they have gone so far as to prosecute parents who have claimed to live in the area so they can get into a particular school. I think that's totally pathetic. People can be so desperate that they have to resort to such things. But we're talking about playing the game. Quite a few people have gotten away with it. And one or two people have been caught. But, they're trying to get an education and they have to go through all of this rigmarole. Now, as I said, so you got the good state sectors in the good areas. And personally, I would say the people who sell houses in good areas, especially to people who have children, because when people are buying a house, especially a young family, one thing that comes to their mind is, what are the schools like? It's just an opinion. I think the estate agents should give some of their commission. To the schools, because if you've got a good school in an area, in a good area, that is reflected in the house prices. When people buy a house, if they've got a family, the type of school it is and its success is reflected in the price. No parent that I know of is going to buy a house in an area with a terrible school. The only people who would do that are people without children, or people don't plan on having children. Maybe it's their first starter home, or they just don't care, or they're planning on staying in a poorer area, a big house, but they plan on sending their children to a private school. That's something. But then we talk about people who've got the money. So these are your choices. You either spend your money on sending your child to a private school, a good one, or you send your child, or you buy a house in a very good area with good schools. Either way, it's going to cost you. And a lot of politicians play the game and so they can stand up and say, I send my child to a state school. Well, of course, you're in a good area. A lot of people do that. Okay, so now let's come to the poor end. What a politician once called your bog standard comprehensive. And for those of you who don't know those terms, bog effectively refers to a standard toilet. Bog standard, toilets all the same. It was a terrible insult, a bog standard comprehensive. Who wants to send their children to a bog standard comprehensive? Who does? Okay, so it was referring to a bog standard comprehensive, send your kids there, be there for 5 years, 6 years, and go out and get a job or something like that. Okay. Now, what I've said reflects largely in the secondary, but it actually plays a part in primary too. And one of the things I didn't mention in terms of this game that people play is the faith schools. And at this point in time, when we talk about faith schools, we're largely talking about either Church of England schools or Catholic schools. There are the faith schools, Buddhist schools, Islamic schools, but when we talk about faith schools, we're largely talking about the Catholic schools or Church of England schools. And it has to be said, by and large, when it comes to primary or secondary, the Church of England schools, but in particular the Catholic schools, usually are better. There are people who said, let's get rid of the faith schools. Don't know why, but they like the ethos. Now, as an insider, I could tell you a lot about that, but this video will just ramble on. I'm just warning people that there are 3 tiers, and before you let your precious children get into the system, you just know what game you're playing, because it is a game. And when I mean a game, it's part of the game of life. Are you going to get your little Johnny or Sally or Abraham or Mohammed or Genevieve through 10, 11 years of education successfully? That's an important game. So, just to summarize, know what the game is. If you got the money, personally, I would say go private. You'll never regret it. You'll be a bit light on the pocket, but by and large, you won't regret it. But just choose a good one. If you can, try and get yourself into a good school in a good area. Now, having said that, not all schools in the poor areas, especially in London, are bad schools. Over the last 10 years, 15 years I would say, probably 20 years, let me say over 20 years, we've had many schools, especially in London, that used to be absolutely dire. You know, well, the professionals know if you send your child in there, they're going to go in with nothing, and they're going to come out with nothing. They were expected to not do well. It was, you know, they were going with you know, nothing, will come out with nothing. It was accepted. But through, and I have to say, largely through the Labour governments, a lot of investments was put into schools, and the London schools started to outstrip the rest of the country. There are other issues there, but in fact, what I'm going to do, I'm going to do a series, because there's just so much to this game. Now, don't ask me about the NHS. I can't talk about the NHS. But when it comes to education, in the United Kingdom, that's what I did for 30 plus years. And I can tell you the in and outs of it, how to play the game. So, in this part of the game, you decide which tier you're going to go to. If it's a private, you're going to shell out a lot of money. And don't get me wrong, you're going to have to work hard, because the schools will work your child very hard. The hours are going to be longer. And I would say a lot of private school kids, when they come out, part of the reason why they're successful is that their hours are long. When I was using the private sector, my child would start school, let's say from the time they go out of the house, say 7 o'clock, and they won't be coming back till 6, and they finally settle home around 7 o'clock. To them, they were just used to it. State sector, you rock and roll in there, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 2:30, 3:30, school's out. Now, if you've been at school for 6 years, spending the best part of 12 hours in school, working, or admittedly, when in the private sector, the last couple of hours or hour is doing games and sport. But the point of the matter is, they're in there, they're in school, they're at a job. By the time they finish the day, it's home. They got a lot of work to do. It's a lot of work to do as a parent, you know. But that's that. In the state sector, If you send your child to the state sector, one thing you're going to have to do, you're going to have to supplement the education. And that leads to another topic for another time, which is the shadow education system. Effectively, the whole system of tutors, private tutors, tutor schools, holiday clubs, that has crept up. It's a multi-billion pound industry that shadows the state sector and even the private sector. Nobody talks about it. It's a huge area. People are paying money to educate their children who are in the state sector, sometimes private sector. And I'll just kind of digress briefly. I know of a school that was in a good area, there's a good state sector, and the teachers thought they worked hard, but actually they weren't really working that hard. The reason why the children used to pass the exams is because all the parents had tutors for the children. So they thought they were really doing very well. Actually, the tutors that was helping these children. But their parents had to pay the money. But if you think about it, it's all middle class parents. They could afford to send the kids private. But maybe for political reasons or don't want to do it, they put that money to tutors. The people at the bottom of the pile, if you are in a poor area and you don't have a school which is really dedicated to children from the poor areas, then I'm sorry to say, you really are not in the game. You're not in the running. So, if you're new to the country, you've been in this country for a long time, you don't know what's going on, all I'd say to you, you be very careful that your child doesn't end up in the tier 3 school. They'll go in a poor school that isn't doing very well. And in another video, I'll talk about how to identify a good school in the state sector. But in this part of the game, just know what the overall lay of the land is, because they're going to be going to school, well, at least for 10, 11 years. They're going to do, 10, 11 years. And at the end of it, they're going to be really fit for life in a modern country. So there you are. So that's education in the United Kingdom. And I've largely focused on it around London, even though I haven't spoken so much about London. But the London phenomenon is pretty much reflective elsewhere. London is quite a special case. There's so many other issues that why London has gone forward. I mentioned governmental intervention, but there's a lot of issues because you can talk about schools in the seaside areas, etc. It's just so much stuff to this education game. You gotta know the rules of the game, which is why I keep saying, if you want to make your way in this country, you better know the rules of this country. Because if you don't know the rules of this country, you are going nowhere. You think you're going anywhere, but you're going nowhere. And don't talk about, the thing about it is, you got to know the rules of the game and play the game. And I don't mean it in a cynical way. Every club, every country, every group of people have rules. Most of the time the rules are not written down. So I'm telling you, the first part of the rule is just know there are 3 types of schools. And then in other videos I'll talk about how you can navigate your way through the education system. Now, if this has been helpful, let me know. Share with other people. And as I said, I was in the system for 30 plus years. That's where I did my profession. I know in and out, not just as a teacher. As a teacher, primary, secondary, and I worked for local authorities. I've been through a whole lot, so I know it inside out. And don't mind saying myself, whatever it is about the school system, I know about it because I was in it. So there you are. So play the game, or rather know the game, know the rules, Play the game, get your children through so that they can go on to be, well, happy, successful, and you know, that's what you want. Okay, over and out.